The dust cloud rising from the stagecoach wheels settled across the parched earth of Fort Stanton, New Mexico, as Amelia Morrison stepped down onto ground that looked more cracked than the dried riverbeds she had passed along the journey west. And she wondered if coming here in the summer of 1878 had been the worst decision of her 22 years, or the only one that made sense anymore. The air shimmered with heat waves that made the distant mountains appear to dance, and the small collection of weathered buildings that comprised the town center looked about as welcoming as a rattlesnake's den. But Amelia had not traveled all the way from Philadelphia with 3 trunks, her late mother's jewelry box, and a deed to property she had never seen because she was afraid of hard work or inhospitable landscapes. Her uncle had left her the land in his will, a man she had met only twice in her childhood before he headed west to make his fortune. The letter from the lawyer had arrived 6 months after her mother's death from consumption, when Amelia was living in a boarding house and working as a seamstress for pennies that barely covered her rent. The deed represented something she had never possessed before, something that belonged to her alone, roots she could plant deep into soil that would not be pulled away by circumstance or fate. Miss Morrison. A weathered man in a dusty vest approached her, his eyes squinting against the afternoon sun. "I'm Walter Kemp, the land agent. I have a wagon ready to take you out to your property." Amelia nodded, smoothing her traveling dress despite knowing it was a losing battle against the dust that seemed to coat everything in this territory. "Thank you, Mr. Kemp. I appreciate you meeting me." The ride out to the property took nearly an hour, and with each passing mile, Amelia's heart sank lower in her chest. The landscape was beautiful in its own harsh way, with scrub brush and scattered piñon trees dotting the rolling hills, but there was a dryness to everything that spoke of struggle. When they finally crested a ridge and Walter pointed down into a valley, she saw what was meant to be her salvation. The ranch house was small, constructed of adobe that had seen better days, with several outbuildings in various states of disrepair. A barn leaned slightly to one side, and what must have once been corrals now featured broken fencing that would not hold a determined goat, let alone cattle. The land stretched out in all directions, acres upon acres of parched grass and dirt, with a creek bed running through the property that appeared to be nothing more than a dusty scar in the earth. "Your uncle tried for 3 years to make something of this place," Walter said, not unkindly. "The drought has been hard on everyone, but this property, it seems to have gotten the worst of it. The creek dried up 2 summers back, and without water, well." He trailed off, the conclusion obvious. "Is there anyone else living here?" Amelia asked, noticing smoke rising from the chimney despite the heat. "Ethan Blackwell has been managing the place since your uncle passed. He worked for your uncle, stayed on to keep the property from falling into complete ruin. Good man, honest, but I will not lie to you, Miss Morrison. He has been talking about moving on. There is no money to pay him, and a man cannot live on hope alone." The wagon rolled down into the valley, and as they approached the ranch house, a figure emerged from the barn. Even from a distance, Amelia could see he was tall, with broad shoulders that spoke of years of hard labor. He wore a hat pulled low against the sun, and he moved with the easy confidence of someone who belonged to this land, even if the land itself seemed determined to reject all human habitation. Ethan Blackwell watched the wagon approach with a mixture of curiosity and resignation. He had been expecting this day for months, ever since the lawyer's letter had informed him that the property had an heir back east. He had assumed some distant relative would sell the place for whatever they could get, and he would finally be free to move on to one of the larger ranches that were always looking for experienced hands. He had not expected the woman who climbed down from the wagon, her dress covered in trail dust, but her spine straight and her eyes clear as she surveyed the failing ranch that was now her inheritance. "Mr. Blackwell," Walter called out. "This is Miss Amelia Morrison, your new employer." Ethan removed his hat, revealing dark hair that curled slightly at his collar and eyes the color of the New Mexico sky before a storm. He was perhaps 26 or 27, with a face weathered by sun and wind but still young, still holding on to some hope that life had not yet beaten out of him completely. "Miss Morrison," he said, his voice a low rumble that carried the accent of someone raised in Texas. "Welcome to the Broken Creek Ranch." "Broken Creek," Amelia repeated. "That is what my uncle named it." "That is what everyone calls it," Ethan replied, "on account of the creek being dry most of the year now. Your uncle, he called it Morning Star Ranch, but names do not mean much when the water stops flowing." Walter helped unload Amelia's trunks, declining her offer of payment for the transport, saying it was included in the land agent's services. He tipped his hat to both of them and climbed back onto his wagon, leaving Amelia alone with the cowboy and the dying ranch that was somehow supposed to represent her future. "I suppose you will be wanting to see the books," Ethan said, breaking the awkward silence that had settled between them. "Though I warn you, the numbers are not pretty. We have no cattle left, sold off the last of them 4 months back just to pay for seed and supplies. The chickens still produce some eggs, and there is a vegetable garden I have been trying to keep alive. But beyond that—" He gestured at the parched landscape surrounding them. "Show me everything," Amelia said firmly. "I did not come all this way to turn around at the first sign of difficulty." Something flickered in Ethan's eyes, something that might have been respect or might have been amusement, she could not quite tell. "All right then. Let us start with the house." The interior of the adobe structure was surprisingly cool, a welcome relief from the relentless sun. The main room served as both kitchen and living area, with a large fireplace dominating one wall and a table with mismatched chairs in the center. 2 small bedrooms branched off from the main space, and Ethan quickly explained that he had been sleeping in the barn to keep the house ready for her arrival. "You do not need to sleep in the barn," Amelia protested. "Surely we can make some arrangement." "It would not be proper," Ethan said simply. "You are an unmarried woman and I am an unmarried man. People talk, even out here where there are not that many people to do the talking." Amelia wanted to argue that she cared little for propriety after everything she had been through, but she recognized the firmness in his tone. This was a man who lived by a code, even when that code made his life more difficult. She found herself respecting that, even as she worried about the practicality of their situation. Over the next several hours, Ethan walked her through the property, explaining everything her uncle had tried and why it had failed. The creek had been the lifeblood of the ranch, feeding into a small pond that watered the cattle and irrigated the fields. When it dried up, everything had begun to die. Her uncle had tried digging wells, but the water table was too deep, and the cost of equipment was beyond his means. He had tried smaller crops that needed less water, but without capital to invest in proper irrigation systems, those efforts had withered just like everything else. "Why did you stay?" Amelia asked as they stood near the dry creek bed, looking at the cracked earth that had once run with water. "You said yourself there is no money to pay you." Ethan was quiet for a long moment, his eyes scanning the horizon. "Your uncle was good to me when I needed work. I was 23, had just lost my own family's ranch in Texas to a bank foreclosure after my father died. I was angry at the world, angry at God, angry at myself for not being able to save what my father had built. Your uncle, he gave me a job, gave me a purpose, treated me like family. When he died, I figured I owed it to him to try to keep this place going until you got here. I owed him that much." The raw honesty in his words touched something deep in Amelia's chest. She understood that kind of loyalty, that kind of debt that went beyond money. "What do you think it would take to save this place?" she asked. Ethan turned to look at her, his expression cautious. "You are serious about trying?" "I have nowhere else to go," Amelia said simply. "Everything I own is in those 3 trunks. I can sew, I can keep books, I can learn whatever else needs learning. But I need someone who knows this land, who knows ranching. I need you to tell me honestly if there is any chance at all." "There is always a chance," Ethan said slowly. "But it would take money we do not have, work that would break most people, and a fair bit of luck with the weather. The creek, it still flows sometimes, usually in spring when the snow melts in the mountains. If we could find a way to capture that water, store it for the dry months, we might be able to get some cattle, start rebuilding. But the materials alone for a proper reservoir would cost more than this ranch is worth right now." "How much?" Amelia pressed. Ethan named a figure that made her heart sink. It was more than her uncle's entire estate was worth, more than she could possibly raise even if she sold everything she owned, including the land itself. The practical part of her brain, the part that had learned to survive in Philadelphia through careful calculation and measured risk, told her to cut her losses now, sell the property for whatever she could get, and find some other way to make a life for herself. But another part of her, the part that had driven her to board that stagecoach despite having no idea what awaited her, refused to accept defeat so easily. She had come west looking for something more than survival. She had come looking for a place to belong, for something to build that could not be taken away by illness or poverty or the casual cruelty of a world that cared nothing for a young woman alone. "Then we start smaller," she said. "What could we do with what we have right now?" Ethan studied her face, and she met his gaze steadily, refusing to look away. Whatever he saw there must have satisfied him, because he gave a small nod. "We could try to improve the garden, maybe sell vegetables in town. It would not bring in much, but it would be something. And I could hire on with some of the bigger ranches for seasonal work, bring in some cash that way. If we could save enough over the next year, maybe we could afford a few head of cattle, start building back up slow." It was not the grand vision Amelia had harbored during her journey west, but it was a plan, and that was more than she had possessed an hour ago. "All right," she said. "Then that is what we will do." They walked back to the house in the fading light, and Amelia could not help noticing the way Ethan moved, the easy grace despite his size, the constant awareness of his surroundings that spoke to years of living in a land that demanded vigilance. When they reached the house, he helped her carry her trunks inside, placing them in what had been her uncle's bedroom, which would now be hers. "I will cook us some supper," Ethan said. "Nothing fancy, just beans and cornbread, but it is filling." "Let me," Amelia countered. "You have been taking care of this place alone for months. The least I can do is cook a meal." They compromised, working together in the small kitchen, and Amelia found herself stealing glances at the cowboy as he moved about the space with surprising competence. He was nothing like the men she had known in Philadelphia, with their soft hands and calculated manners. Everything about Ethan was direct, honest, shaped by a life that allowed no room for pretense or deception. Over dinner, they talked more about the ranch, but also about their lives before. Amelia told him about Philadelphia, about her mother's long illness and death, about the loneliness of the boarding house and the endless hours bent over needle and thread. Ethan shared stories of his childhood in Texas, of learning to ride before he could properly walk, of the heartbreak of watching his father's dream crumble under the weight of debt and drought. "It is strange," Amelia said as they finished eating. "We both lost everything, ended up here through paths we never would have chosen, and yet somehow it feels like maybe this is where we were supposed to end up all along." "Maybe," Ethan said quietly. "Or maybe we just make the best of the hand we are dealt and call it fate afterward." That night, lying in bed in the small adobe house, listening to the wind whistle through the eaves and the distant cry of a coyote, Amelia felt something she had not experienced in years. It was not quite hope, not yet, but it was the possibility of hope, the sense that maybe, just maybe, she had found something worth fighting for. The next weeks fell into a rhythm that was both exhausting and oddly satisfying. Amelia rose before dawn each day, learning to manage the small flock of chickens, working in the garden under Ethan's patient instruction, trying to coax life from soil that seemed determined to remain barren. Her hands, soft from years of indoor work, blistered and calloused. Her fair skin burned despite the bonnet she wore, then tanned to a color that would have scandalized the ladies of Philadelphia. Ethan worked from before sunrise until well after dark, repairing fences, shoring up the barn, doing everything that one man could possibly do to hold a failing ranch together. He treated Amelia with unfailing courtesy, never presuming, never crossing the invisible line that propriety demanded between them. But Amelia noticed things. She noticed how he always made sure she ate before he did, how he positioned himself between her and any potential danger, how his eyes would sometimes linger on her face when he thought she was not looking, and she noticed her own reactions to him. The way her pulse quickened when he emerged from the barn in the morning, his shirt already damp with sweat. The comfort she felt in his presence, the sense of safety that had nothing to do with physical protection and everything to do with the quiet strength he carried within him. The way his rare smiles, small and fleeting as they were, could brighten her entire day. One evening, about a month after her arrival, they were sitting on the porch after supper, watching the sun paint the sky in shades of orange and purple. The heat of the day was finally breaking, and a slight breeze carried the scent of sage and creosote. "I have been thinking," Amelia said, breaking the comfortable silence. "About water." Ethan turned to look at her, waiting. "You said the creek flows in spring, correct? When the snow melts." "Usually, yes. Not much, but some. And you said we cannot afford to build a proper reservoir. But what if we did not need something that large? What if we created a series of smaller catchments, places where the water could collect and soak into the ground instead of just running off? It would not solve everything, but it might help keep the soil from being quite so dry." Ethan was quiet for a moment, considering. "That could work," he said slowly. "If we dug trenches along the creek bed, lined them with rocks to slow the flow, let the water spread out and sink in instead of rushing past. It would not give us enough for cattle, but it might help the garden, maybe even some hay if we could plant it right." "Could we do it ourselves?" Amelia asked. "Or would it require more help?" "It would be hard work," Ethan warned. "Digging in this soil, moving rocks. But yes, I think the two of us could manage it if we started soon, got it ready before the spring melt." "Then let us do it," Amelia said firmly. Ethan looked at her, and in the fading light, his eyes were intense, searching. "Why are you doing this?" he asked quietly. "You could sell this place tomorrow, go back east, find yourself a husband with means, live a comfortable life. Why are you choosing to stay here and break your back over land that may never give you anything in return?" Amelia met his gaze steadily. "Because this is mine," she said simply. "Not given to me by a husband, not dependent on someone else's charity or goodwill. This land, this ranch, it belongs to me. And maybe it will fail, Maybe we will lose everything trying to save it, but at least it will be my choice, my effort. I spent too many years of my life at the mercy of circumstances beyond my control. Here I can fight. Here I can try. That means something." Understanding flickered across Ethan's face, and he nodded slowly. "I can respect that," he said. "All right then, we start tomorrow." The work was brutal. They began at first light each morning when the air was still relatively cool, digging trenches along the dry creek bed, using picks to break through the hardened soil and shovels to clear it away. Amelia's hands, just beginning to heal from garden work, blistered anew and then bled through the cloth she wrapped around them. Her back ached, her shoulders burned, and every muscle in her body screamed protest. But Ethan worked beside her, never asking her to do less, never suggesting she was not capable. When she faltered, he would quietly take over the heaviest work, giving her time to catch her breath. When she pushed too hard, he would call a break, bringing water from the well and sitting with her in what little shade they could find. They talked as they worked, sharing stories, dreams, fears. Ethan told her about his mother, who had died when he was 12, and how his father had never really recovered from the loss. Amelia shared memories of her own mother, the slow fade of consumption, the helplessness of watching someone you love slip away despite all your prayers and efforts. "Do you ever wonder if the people we lost can see us now?" Amelia asked one afternoon, wiping sweat from her brow. "If they know what we are doing, what we are trying to build." "I hope so," Ethan said quietly. "I hope my father knows I am still trying, still fighting for the kind of life he wanted for me. And I hope your uncle knows that his niece came all this way to save what he started, that his dream did not die with him." The words settled between them, heavy with meaning, and Amelia felt tears prick her eyes. She turned away so Ethan would not see, focusing on the trench they were digging, on the physical work that was easier to manage than the emotions churning in her chest. As the weeks passed and summer began its slow transition toward fall, the network of trenches and catchments took shape. They lined the bottoms with rocks hauled from the surrounding hills, creating barriers that would slow water flow and encourage seepage into the soil. It was not the grand irrigation system that would save the ranch, but it was progress, tangible evidence that human will could shape even this harsh landscape. The work also changed things between them. There was an intimacy in shared labor, in working toward a common goal that went beyond words. Amelia found herself watching Ethan more openly, admiring the play of muscles under his shirt as he worked, the concentration on his face when he was planning the next trench, the unexpected gentleness in his hands when he helped her over rough ground. And she caught him watching her too, his expression unguarded in those moments, showing something that made her heart race and her breath catch. But neither of them spoke of it. The invisible line of propriety still stretched between them, and neither seemed willing to be the first to cross it. One evening in late September, they were returning to the house after a long day of work when they heard the sound of hoofbeats approaching. 3 riders crested the ridge, and even from a distance, Amelia could see they were not friendly visitors. They rode with the casual arrogance of men used to getting their way, and when they reined in their horses near the porch, their eyes swept over the property with undisguised disdain. "This the Broken Creek place?" the lead rider asked. He was a heavy-set man with a thick beard and small eyes that calculated the value of everything they touched. "Morning Star Ranch," Ethan corrected, his voice flat. "What can we do for you gentlemen?" "Name is Clayton Reed," the man said. "I run the Double R spread north of here. Heard old Morrison's niece had come out from back east to claim the place." "That you?" He nodded toward Amelia. "I am Amelia Morrison," she said, stepping forward despite the warning tension in Ethan's posture. This is my property. Clayton Reed's laugh was not pleasant. Your property, huh? Tell me, Miss Morrison, you got any cattle on this property? Any horses worth the name? Anything other than dirt and dried-up creek beds? We are rebuilding, Amelia said stiffly. Rebuilding, Reed repeated as if the word was amusing. Let me save you some trouble, little lady. This land is not worth the dirt it is sitting on. Has not been for 3 years, will not be for 3 more. Your uncle was a fool to think he could make something of it, and you are a bigger fool for trying. But I am a generous man. I will give you $500 for the whole spread. That is more than fair for land that will not grow grass or hold water. It is not for sale, Amelia said. Reed's expression hardened. Everything is for sale at the right price. 600 then. That is my final offer. Mr. Reed, the lady said the ranch is not for sale, Ethan said, his voice carrying a dangerous edge that Amelia had not heard before. I think it is time for you and your men to move along. The 3 riders exchanged glances, and the tension in the air thickened. Reed leaned forward in his saddle, his eyes on Ethan. I know you, Blackwell. You are that kid from Texas, the one whose daddy lost everything. You are nobody, working for nothing on a ranch that is worth less than nothing. You got no stake here, no claim. So maybe you ought to shut your mouth and let the property owner make her own decisions. I have made my decision, Amelia said firmly. The ranch is not for sale, not for $600, not for any amount. Good day, Mr. Reed. For a moment, Amelia thought Reed might push the issue, might try to intimidate or threaten them into compliance. But something in Ethan's stance, in the way his hand rested casually near the gun at his hip, must have convinced the rancher to leave it alone, at least for now. You will change your tune come winter, Reed said, gathering his reins. When you are cold and hungry and this place is buried under snow, you will wish you had taken my offer, but it will not be on the table any more. He wheeled his horse around and rode off, his 2 companions following, leaving a cloud of dust in their wake. Who was that man? Amelia asked once they were out of earshot. Trouble, Ethan said grimly. Clayton Reed has been buying up failed ranches all over this valley for the past 5 years, usually for a fraction of what they are worth. He waits until people get desperate, then swoops in like a vulture. Your uncle refused to sell to him, and it made Reed angry. A man like that, he is not used to being told no. Will he try something? Amelia asked, feeling a flutter of fear in her stomach. Maybe, Ethan said, but we will be ready if he does. In the meantime, we keep working, keep building. The best answer to men like Clayton Reed is success. But success seemed as distant as ever as fall deepened, and the reality of their situation became harder to ignore. The garden that had flourished in the late summer heat began to die back with the cooling temperatures. The money they had made from selling vegetables in town was barely enough to buy supplies for winter. And Ethan had not found any seasonal work on the larger ranches, most of which had their own struggles and were not hiring. One morning in early October, Amelia was gathering the last of the squash from the garden when she heard a horse approaching. She looked up to see Ethan riding in from town, and something about his posture told her he had news. "What is it?" she asked as he dismounted. "I found work," he said. "But it is not what I was hoping for. The railroad is hiring for a crew to lay tracks south of here. It is dangerous work, but it pays well. 3 months of work would bring in enough money to buy cattle come spring, maybe even some of the materials we need for a proper water system." 3 months. Amelia repeated, her heart sinking. "You would be gone for 3 months." "I would leave at the end of this week, be back by January," Ethan said. He was not looking at her, his eyes fixed on some point in the distance. "I know it leaves you alone here, but you are capable, Amelia. You have proven that over and over. And the money, it could change everything for us. For the ranch, us." The word hung in the air between them, casual and yet freighted with meaning. Amelia wanted to ask what he meant by us, wanted to demand why he thought she could manage 3 months alone on a failing ranch in the middle of nowhere, wanted to beg him not to go. But she did none of those things, because he was right. The money could save the ranch, could give them the chance they needed, and she was capable. She had survived worse than loneliness. "Then you should take it," she said, forcing her voice to remain steady. "We need the money." Ethan finally looked at her, and the expression in his eyes made her breath catch. "Amelia, I need to tell you something before I go. I need you to know that I am not doing this just for the ranch, or because I owed your uncle. I am doing this because somewhere along the way, these past few months, this stopped being about obligation and started being about something else entirely." Her heart was hammering in her chest. "What are you saying?" "I am saying that I care about you," Ethan said, the words rough, unpracticed. "I am saying that I think about you every moment of every day, that working beside you has been the best part of my life, that the thought of leaving you here alone makes me want to turn down that job and damn the consequences. I am saying that I have fallen in love with you, Amelia Morrison, and I needed you to know that before I left." The world seemed to tilt on its axis. Amelia stood there in the middle of the dying garden, covered in dirt, her dress patched and faded, and felt more beautiful than she had ever felt in her life. Because Ethan Blackwell, this strong, honest, good man, loved her. "I love you too," she whispered, the words escaping before she could think about them, before caution or propriety or common sense could hold them back. "I have loved you for weeks now, maybe longer. I did not know how to say it, did not know if you felt the same way." In 2 strides, Ethan crossed the space between them, his hands coming up to cup her face with a gentleness that belied his strength. "I feel the same way," he said, his voice low and intense. "I love you, Amelia, and when I come back in January, if you will have me, I want to marry you. I want to build this ranch together, build a life together. I want everything with you." "Yes," Amelia breathed. "Yes to all of it." He kissed her then, and it was nothing like the chaste, proper kisses she had read about in novels. It was hungry and desperate and full of all the longing they had been holding back for months. His arms came around her, pulling her close, and she melted into him, into the solid warmth of him, into the promise of a future that suddenly seemed bright with possibility. When they finally pulled apart, both breathing hard, Ethan rested his forehead against hers. 3 months, he said. "I will work every day, save every penny, and then I will come back to you. Wait for me." "I will wait," Amelia promised. "However long it takes, I will be here." The days until Ethan's departure passed too quickly. They spent every moment together, talking late into the night, making plans for the ranch and their future. Ethan showed Amelia everything she would need to know to manage alone, from maintaining the well pump to protecting the chickens from predators. He taught her to shoot his rifle, insisting she keep it in the house while he was gone. On his last night, they sat together on the porch, and Amelia tried to memorize everything about him. The way his hair curled at his collar, the small scar on his chin from a childhood accident, the calluses on his hands that spoke of years of hard work. She wanted to hold on to these details, to keep them close during the long winter ahead. "You could come with me," Ethan said suddenly. "The railroad camps, they are not fit places for a woman, but I could find you a room in one of the towns nearby. Then we would not have to be apart." Amelia was tempted, so tempted, but she shook her head. "Someone needs to watch the ranch, and besides, I am not afraid of being alone. I was alone in Philadelphia, truly alone in a way I cannot be here. This place, hard as it is, feels more like home than anywhere I have ever lived. I will be fine." "You are remarkable," Ethan said softly. "The strongest person I have ever known." "I learned from the best," Amelia replied, taking his hand. He left at dawn the next morning, riding toward town where he would catch the supply wagon heading south to the railroad camps. Amelia stood on the porch and watched until he was out of sight, then turned back to face the ranch that was now hers alone to manage. The first weeks were not as hard as she had feared. The weather remained mild, and she fell into a routine of chores that kept her busy from sunrise to sunset. She tended the chickens, preserved the last of the garden vegetables, and spent long hours working on the catchment system they had built, reinforcing the rock barriers and clearing debris from the trenches. But as October gave way to November, loneliness began to creep in. The nights were the hardest, when the wind howled around the little adobe house, and the darkness seemed absolute. She had not realized how much Ethan's presence had meant, not just for the work he did, but for the simple comfort of another human being nearby. She wrote him letters, long, rambling accounts of her days, though she had no way to send them. The railroad camps moved constantly, following the track laying, and mail was unreliable at best. So she wrote anyway, pouring her heart onto paper, creating a record of their time apart. In mid-November, a freak early storm blew in from the north, bringing with it snow and temperatures that dropped below freezing. Amelia spent 2 days huddled by the fireplace, burning through wood at an alarming rate, terrified that the chickens would freeze or that some part of the house's structure would fail. But when the storm finally passed and she ventured outside, she found everything intact. The chickens had survived in their coop, the house had held firm, and the world was transformed into a landscape of white that was both beautiful and intimidating. As she stood looking at the snow-covered valley, Amelia heard the sound of horses approaching. Her heart leaped, hoping against hope that Ethan had somehow returned early, but the riders that appeared were strangers. 4 men, bundled against the cold, riding slowly through the snow. For a moment, fear clenched in her stomach. She was alone, isolated, vulnerable. But she forced herself to stand tall as the riders approached, her hand resting on the rifle she had propped near the door, just as Ethan had taught her. "Hello, the house," the lead rider called out. He was an older man with a weathered face and kind eyes. "We mean no harm, madam. Just passing through, wondering if you might have some feed to spare for our horses. We can pay." Amelia relaxed slightly. There was something genuine about the man's manner, a weariness that spoke of hard travel rather than ill intent. "I have some feed," she said. "You are welcome to it. No payment necessary." The men dismounted, and Amelia led them to the barn where she kept the meager stores of hay and grain. As they tended their horses, the older man introduced himself as Frank Miller, a rancher from Colorado who was moving his family south for the winter. "That your place, madam?" he asked, nodding toward the ranch house. "It is," Amelia confirmed. Frank looked around, taking in the condition of the property, the obvious signs of struggle. "Hard country," he said. "Hard time to be working a place like this alone. You got family here?" "Not yet," Amelia said, and found herself telling him about Ethan, about the railroad work, about their plans to save the ranch. She did not know why she was sharing so much with this stranger, except that it had been so long since she had spoken to another human being, and the words seemed to pour out of their own accord. Frank listened quietly, nodding occasionally. When she finished, he was quiet for a moment, then said, "My wife and I, we started with nothing 40 years ago. Built our ranch from dirt and determination. It was not easy and there were times we wanted to give up, but we made it work. You will too if you got the grit for it. And from what I can see, you do." The simple words of encouragement meant more than Amelia could express. When Frank and his companions rode off an hour later, she felt stronger somehow, more certain that she could endure the winter, that she and Ethan could build something lasting. December brought more snow and bitter cold. Amelia's supplies dwindled, and she began rationing carefully, making meals from dried beans and the preserves she had put up. The chickens stopped laying eggs in the cold, and she spent anxious hours trying to keep them alive, bringing them into the house at night when the temperatures dropped too low. Christmas came and went, marked only by Amelia's awareness of the date and a brief moment of prayer for Ethan's safety. She wondered where he was, if he was cold, if he was thinking of her. She sat by the fire that night and read through all the letters she had written to him, imagining his voice reading them, imagining his presence beside her. January arrived, and with it came a thaw that turned the snow to mud and made the ranch a mire of frozen slush. Amelia counted the days, calculating when Ethan might return. The 3 months he had mentioned would be up by mid-January, but she knew that such timelines were never exact. There could be delays, complications, whether that prevented travel. She tried not to worry, but as January wore on and there was no sign of him, fear began to gnaw at her. What if something had happened? What if he was hurt or worse? What if the railroad work had taken him farther south than planned, and he would not be back for weeks or even months more on a cold morning in late January? Amelia was carrying water from the well when she saw a figure on horseback cresting the ridge. Her heart leaped into her throat and the bucket slipped from her hands, spilling water across the frozen ground. She shaded her eyes against the winter sun, hardly daring to hope. The rider came closer, and she could make out the familiar set of his shoulders, the way he sat a horse, the hat pulled low against the cold. It was him. It was Ethan. Amelia ran. She did not care about propriety or dignity or anything except closing the distance between them. Ethan saw her coming and urged his horse into a canter, and when he reached her, he practically fell from the saddle in his haste to take her in his arms. "Amelia," he breathed, crushing her against him. "God, I missed you. Every day, every moment, I missed you." "You are back," she said, her voice breaking. "You are really back." They stood there in the middle of the muddy yard, holding each other, and Amelia felt whole for the first time in 3 months. When they finally pulled apart, she could see the changes in him. He was thinner, his face more weathered, his hands rougher than ever, but his eyes were alight with joy and triumph. "I have news," he said. "Good news. The railroad paid well, even better than I had hoped, and I got extra work on the side helping to build a bridge. I have enough money, Amelia. Enough to buy cattle, enough for materials to build a proper reservoir, enough to give us a real chance." Amelia felt tears streaming down her face and she laughed through them. "I knew you would do it. I never doubted." "And I have something else," Ethan said, reaching into his coat. He pulled out a small box and opened it to reveal a simple gold band. "It is not much, but I bought it in the last town before coming home. Amelia Morrison, I love you more than words can express. Will you marry me? Will you be my wife?" "Yes," Amelia said, not hesitating for even a heartbeat. "Yes, 1,000 times yes." He slipped the ring onto her finger and it fit perfectly as if it had been made for her. They kissed then, long and deep, sealing the promise between them. Over the next days, as Ethan settled back into life at the ranch, they made plans. They would travel to Fort Stanton as soon as possible and find a minister to marry them. Then they would begin the work of truly rebuilding the ranch, of turning it into the home they both dreamed of. But first, Ethan needed to hear everything that had happened during his absence. Amelia told him about the early storm, about Frank Miller's visit, about the long, lonely nights and the small triumphs of survival. She showed him how she had maintained everything he had taught her, how she had kept the ranch functioning against the odds. "You are amazing," Ethan said, shaking his head in wonder. "Most people would have given up, would have sold to Clayton Reed or just abandoned the place. But you stayed, you fought. I should have known you would. You are the strongest person I have ever met." "I had something to fight for," Amelia said simply. "I had you to come back to and a future to build. That made all the difference." They rode to Fort Stanton 2 days later, Amelia riding behind Ethan on his horse since they only had the one. The town was busier than she remembered from her arrival, with more people on the streets and a sense of energy that had been absent before. They found a minister at the small church, a kindly older man who agreed to perform the ceremony that very afternoon. They had no guests, no fancy clothes or elaborate preparations. Amelia wore her best dress, the one she had brought from Philadelphia and never had occasion to wear until now. Ethan had cleaned up as best he could, shaving and putting on a shirt that was only slightly worn. They stood before the minister in the empty church, the afternoon light streaming through the windows, and spoke their vows. When Ethan kissed her as his wife, Amelia felt like her heart might burst from happiness. This moment, standing in this simple church with this good man, meant more than any grand wedding could have. This was real, earned through struggle and hardship and the choice to love each other despite all the obstacles. They spent their wedding night in a small hotel in town, a luxury they could barely afford but that Ethan insisted upon. "You deserve one night where you do not have to worry about hauling water or feeding chickens," he said, and Amelia laughed and agreed. In the morning, they returned to the ranch as husband and wife, ready to begin the next chapter of their lives. The first order of business was cattle. Ethan rode to several of the larger ranches, negotiating deals, and within a week, they had purchased 20 head of young cattle, healthy animals that could form the foundation of a new herd. The cattle arrived in early February, driven by 2 ranch hands who helped Ethan get them settled into the repaired corrals. Seeing actual livestock on the property again, hearing the lowing of cattle and the stamp of hooves, made the ranch feel alive in a way it had not since Amelia's arrival. But having cattle meant needing water, and that brought them back to the problem that had plagued the ranch from the beginning. The well could provide enough for the house and garden, but not for 20 head of cattle. They needed the creek to flow, needed a way to capture and store that water. "We start building the reservoir," Ethan said. "Now, before spring runoff begins. If we can have it ready by the time the snow melts, we can capture that first surge of water." It was ambitious, perhaps too ambitious given their limited resources. But they had come this far on hope and determination, and Amelia was not about to start doubting now. They threw themselves into the work with the same intensity they had brought to the catchment trenches, but on a much larger scale. Ethan had carefully studied reservoir construction during his time at the railroad camps, talking to engineers and learning everything he could. He designed a structure that would dam a natural low point in the creek bed, creating a pond that could hold water through the dry months. They would line it with clay to prevent seepage and build a spillway to handle overflow during heavy runoff. The work was backbreaking. They dug into the hard earth, moved boulders that seemed impossibly heavy, and hauled clay from a deposit they found 2 miles from the ranch. Amelia worked beside Ethan every day, refusing to be left behind or treated as less capable. Her body had grown strong over the months of ranch work, her muscles hardened by labor, and she found she could match Ethan hour for hour, even if she could not always match his strength. They worked through February and into March, as the weather slowly warmed and the first signs of spring appeared. The cattle grazed on the sparse grass, and Ethan supplemented their diet with hay purchased from a larger ranch. Money was tight again, but they were managing, and that was more than they had dared hope for 6 months ago. In late March, they finished the reservoir, or at least the first phase of it. It was not as large as Ethan had originally hoped, but it would hold water, and that was what mattered. They stood back and looked at what they had built, this structure of earth and rock and determination, and felt a pride that went bone deep. "Now we wait," Ethan said, slipping his arm around Amelia's waist. "Wait for the snow to melt, for the creek to flow, and pray that this works." The wait was agonizing. April brought warmer temperatures but not much rain. The snow in the distant mountains melted slowly, and the creek remained dry. Amelia found herself checking it multiple times a day, looking for any sign of water, any indication that their work had not been in vain. And then, on a morning in mid-April, she woke to the sound she had been longing to hear. Water. Running water. She bolted from bed, not even bothering to dress properly, and ran outside in her nightgown. Ethan was already there, standing at the edge of the creek, watching as clear water flowed down from the mountains, following the path they had prepared. "It is working," he said, his voice filled with wonder. "Amelia, it is actually working." They watched as the water flowed into the reservoir, filling the basin they had dug. And for the first time since Amelia had arrived at the ranch, she saw the pond that her uncle must have seen when he first came to this land. The water was brown with runoff, but it was water, precious and life-giving, and it was theirs over the next weeks as spring runoff continued. The reservoir filled and held. The spillway they had built channeled excess water safely past, preventing flooding, while the pond itself grew deeper and clearer. They led the cattle to drink, and seeing the animals standing knee-deep in water, drinking their fill, was one of the most satisfying sights of Amelia's life. With water secured, other improvements became possible. They planted a larger garden, including crops that needed more water. They repaired more of the outbuildings, making the ranch functional again. And as word spread that the Broken Creek Ranch had water, people took notice. Frank Miller, the rancher who had stopped during that November snowstorm, returned in May with a proposition. He was looking to expand his breeding program and wanted to partner with Ethan and Amelia, providing quality breeding stock in exchange for a share of the calves. It was a generous offer, one that would allow them to improve their herd quality without significant capital investment. "Why would you do this?" Amelia asked, suspicious of anything that seemed too good to be true. Frank smiled. "Because I believe in helping young folks who are willing to work hard. And because my wife reminded me that 40 years ago, someone took a chance on us when we had nothing. Time to pay that forward." They accepted the partnership, and within weeks, Frank delivered 3 prime heifers and a young bull that would significantly improve their breeding prospects. The ranch was truly beginning to prosper, growing from the desperate survival of Amelia's first year into something that looked like it might have a real future. But not everyone was happy about their success. In June, Clayton Reed returned, this time with more men and a darker mood. Amelia and Ethan were working in the garden when the riders appeared, 6 of them this time, all armed. "Heard you got water now," Reed said without preamble. "Heard you are making something of this place after all." "We are," Ethan said, straightening and moving slightly in front of Amelia. "Is there something we can help you with, Mr. Reed?" "I want to buy your water rights," Reed said bluntly. "The creek that feeds your reservoir, it flows through my property first. I could dam it up, keep all the water for myself. Or you could sell me the rights to your section, and I will let enough through to keep your cattle alive. $20 a year." "The water rights came with the property," Amelia said, stepping up beside Ethan despite his protective instinct. They are not for sale. You do not understand how things work out here, Reed said, his voice hardening. Water is everything, and people who control water control everything else. I am trying to be reasonable, offering to buy what I could just take. Do not make me be unreasonable. If you dam that creek on your property, it affects everyone downstream, not just us, Ethan pointed out. The people in the valley would not stand for it. The territorial government would not stand for it. Reed laughed, but it was an ugly sound. The territorial government is 100 miles away and does not care about water disputes, and the people in this valley know better than to cross me. You are alone out here, Blackwell. You and your wife. Accidents happen. Ranches burn. Cattle disappear. Would be a shame if something happened to all this hard work. The threat was clear, and Amelia felt anger surge through her. After everything they had endured, everything they had built, this man thought he could intimidate them into giving up. "Get off our property," she said, her voice cold. "Now." Reed stared at her, and for a moment, Amelia thought he might push things to violence. But Ethan's hand was resting casually on his gun, and there was something in his expression that gave even Reed pause. The rancher was a bully, but he was not stupid. Starting a gunfight on their property, witnesses or no witnesses, would bring the kind of attention even he could not buy his way out of. "You will regret this," Reed said finally, gathering his reins. "Both of you will regret this." He rode off, his men following, leaving a pall of menace hanging over the sunny afternoon. "He meant that threat," Amelia said quietly once they were gone. "I know," Ethan replied. "We need to be careful, keep the rifle close, stay alert. And we need to make allies, let people know what is happening. Reed operates in shadows, relies on intimidation. If we shine light on what he is doing, it is harder for him to act." They rode to town the next day and spoke to the land agent, Walter Kemp, explaining the situation. Walter was troubled but not surprised. "Reed has been pushing his weight around for years," he said. "But proving he has done anything illegal is another matter. He is careful, always stops just short of the line. Still, I will spread the word, let people know to keep an eye out. And I will send a letter to the territorial office in Santa Fe, document what is happening. It may not help immediately, but it creates a record." They also visited Frank Miller at his ranch, explaining the situation. Frank listened with a grim expression, then said, "Reed has tried this before with other small ranchers. Most of them sold out rather than fight. But you have something they did not. You have friends now, partners. And you have proved you can make this land work. That matters. I will put the word out among the other ranchers that Reed is making threats. We will watch your back." The support helped, but it did not eliminate the threat. Amelia and Ethan spent the summer months looking over their shoulders, waiting for Reed to make his move. But weeks passed, and nothing happened. The cattle fattened on good grass and plentiful water. The garden produced abundantly, and the ranch continued to prosper. In July, Amelia realized her monthly cycle had not come. She waited another week, then another, before finally admitting to herself what her body was already telling her. She was pregnant. She and Ethan were going to have a child. The news filled her with joy and terror in equal measure. A baby, here on this struggling ranch in the middle of a territory that could be harsh and unforgiving. But also a baby, a new life, a symbol of everything they were building together. She told Ethan that evening as they sat on the porch watching the sunset. His reaction was everything she could have hoped for. Pure, unfiltered joy spread across his face, and he pulled her into his arms, holding her with a tenderness that made her throat tight with emotion. "A baby," he said softly. "We are going to have a baby. Are you happy?" Amelia asked, needing to hear it. "Happy does not begin to cover it," Ethan said. "Amelia, you have given me everything. A home, a purpose, love, and now a family. I never thought I would have any of this. I thought I would spend my life drifting from ranch to ranch, working for other men's dreams. But you changed everything. We changed everything, Amelia corrected. Together. The pregnancy added a new urgency to their efforts to secure the ranch's future. Ethan worked even harder, hiring temporary help to build a proper house, something bigger and sturdier than the small adobe structure. They could not afford much, but they managed a 4-room house with a real floor and glass windows, a place where they could raise a family. The work on the new house was nearly complete when Clayton Reed finally made his move. It came not as violence or direct confrontation, but in a way that was perhaps more insidious. In late August, the creek that fed their reservoir began to slow to a trickle, then stopped entirely. Ethan rowed upstream to investigate and found exactly what he had feared. Reed had built a dam on his property, diverting the creek away from their land. It was legal, or at least existed in a gray area of legality, since he was diverting water on his own property. But the effect was the same as if he had poisoned their well. Without the creek flow, the reservoir would not refill, and come next summer, they would have no water for the cattle. "What do we do?" Amelia asked when Ethan returned with the news. She was 5 months pregnant now, her belly starting to show, and the thought of losing everything they had built made her feel physically ill. "We fight," Ethan said grimly. "We file a complaint with the territorial government, argue that his dam is affecting downstream water rights. It will take time, maybe months or even years to resolve. But we document everything, we make noise, we do not let him do this in the dark." They filed the complaint, just as Ethan had said. Walter Kemp helped them with the paperwork, and Frank Miller testified about the long-standing water flows in the valley. Other small ranchers, emboldened by their stand, came forward with their own complaints about Reed's practices. But legal battles moved slowly, and Ethan knew they needed a more immediate solution. He spent days riding the property, studying the land, looking for alternatives, and he found one. On the far western edge of their property, in an area they had barely explored, he discovered signs of an underground spring. It was not much, just a seep that barely wet the ground, but it suggested water beneath the surface. "We dig a well," Ethan said. "Here, where the spring shows the water table is high. It will be hard work, and there is no guarantee we will find enough water to matter. But it is a chance." They began digging in September, Ethan doing most of the heavy work while Amelia handled the lighter tasks, mindful of her pregnancy. It was slow, exhausting work, going down 10 feet, then 15, then 20, through layers of rock and clay. Amelia began to despair that they would find anything at all, and then, at 25 feet, Ethan's shovel struck something different. He called Amelia over, and together they watched as water began to seep into the bottom of the well, slowly at first, then faster. By the next morning, there was 3 feet of water standing in the well, and it was still rising. "We did it," Amelia whispered, hardly believing it. "We actually did it." They built a proper well structure with a pump, and the water that came up was cold and clear and sweet. It was not as abundant as the creek flow had been, but it was enough. Enough to water the cattle through the winter, enough to keep the garden alive, enough to ensure their survival. When Clayton Reed heard about the well, he rode out to see it for himself. He sat on his horse, staring at the pump and the water flowing from it, and Amelia could see the frustration and anger in his face. He had tried to force them out, had used every tool at his disposal, and they had survived anyway. "You are either the luckiest people in this territory or the most stubborn," Reed said finally. "Maybe both." "We are just people trying to make a life," Amelia said. "We are not your enemies, Mr. Reed. There is enough land, enough water, enough opportunity for all of us." "Why can you not see that?" Something flickered in Reed's expression, something that might have been shame or might have been simply the recognition of defeat. "Because I have spent my whole life fighting for every inch I have gained," he said quietly. "Because I have seen too many people take what was mine, and I decided long ago that I would be the one doing the taking from now on. But maybe you are right. Maybe there is another way." He rode off without another word, and Amelia never knew if he had a genuine change of heart or simply decided they were not worth the continued effort. But the harassment stopped. The dam on the creek was eventually removed, whether by Reed's own hand or by order of the territorial government. Amelia never found out. The important thing was that the water flowed again, and they had both the creek and the well to rely on. Winter came, and with it a sense of peace that Amelia had not felt since arriving at the ranch. The new house was warm and solid, the cattle were healthy and well-fed, and she and Ethan would sit by the fire in the evenings, his hand resting on her swollen belly, feeling their baby kick. "What should we name the baby?" Ethan asked one night. "If it is a boy, I would like to name him after my uncle," Amelia said. "Harold. He gave me this opportunity, this chance at a life. I would like to honor that." "Harold Blackwell," Ethan said, testing the name. "I like it." "And if it is a girl, Rose," Amelia said. "After my mother. Her middle name was Rose, and she always loved the flower even though we could never afford to buy any." "Harold or Rose Blackwell," Ethan said softly. "Our child, our family." The baby came in February, during a cold snap that turned the world white with snow. The birth was long and difficult, attended by a midwife from town who had made the journey out to the ranch despite the weather. Amelia labored through the night, Ethan pacing outside the bedroom, listening to her cries and feeling utterly helpless. But when dawn broke, so did the sound of a baby's cry. The midwife opened the door, her face tired but smiling. "You have a son," she said, "a healthy boy. And your wife is doing fine." Ethan entered the room to find Amelia propped up in bed, exhausted but radiant, holding a tiny bundle wrapped in blankets. "Meet Harold," she said softly. "Harold Ethan Blackwell." Ethan sat beside her, looking down at his son, at this tiny perfect person who was half him and half the woman he loved. The baby had Amelia's delicate features and a shock of dark hair that matched Ethan's. He was perfect, absolutely perfect. "Thank you," Ethan whispered, not sure if he was thanking Amelia or God or the universe itself. "Thank you for this, for him, for everything." The first months of parenthood were exhausting but joyful. Harold was a good baby, healthy and hungry and curious about the world from the moment he opened his eyes. Amelia recovered from the birth quickly, her body strengthened by years of ranch work, and within weeks she was back to her regular routine, though now with a baby strapped to her back or sleeping in a basket nearby. Spring came, and with it the resolution of their legal complaint against Clayton Reed. The territorial government ruled that the dam on Reed's property had illegally impacted downstream water rights and ordered it permanently removed. It was a significant victory, not just for them but for all the small ranchers in the valley who had been at Reed's mercy. More importantly, it sent a message. The days of the big ranchers doing whatever they wanted were ending. Law and order were coming to the territory, slowly but surely, and people like Ethan and Amelia who worked hard and played by the rules would be protected. The ranch continued to grow. They sold their first calves that spring, making enough money to pay off some debts and invest in more improvements. Frank Miller's breeding program was paying dividends, and their herd was now recognized as having some of the best cattle in the valley. By the time Harold was a year old, The ranch that had been failing when Amelia arrived was flourishing. They had doubled the size of their herd, built a proper barn and several outbuildings, and the reservoir and well provided reliable water year-round. The garden produced enough vegetables to feed them and sell surplus in town. They were not rich by any means, but they were comfortable, secure, building something that would last. One evening, as they sat on the porch of their house watching Harold toddle around the yard chasing chickens, Amelia reflected on the journey that had brought them here. It had been just over 2 years since she stepped off that stagecoach in Fort Stanton, terrified and uncertain, with nothing but a deed to failing land and a desperate hope for something better. "What are you thinking about?" Ethan asked, noticing her distant expression. "How far we have come," Amelia said. "How different everything is from what I expected when I arrived. I thought I was coming here to claim some land, maybe sell it, start over somewhere else. I never imagined this, us, a family, a real home." "I never imagined it either," Ethan admitted. "When you stepped off that wagon, I thought you would last maybe a week before heading back east. You looked so out of place, so fragile. I have never been more wrong about anything in my life. You are the strongest person I know, Amelia. You saved this ranch. You saved me." "We saved each other," Amelia corrected, leaning into him. "That is what love does. It makes us stronger than we could ever be alone." Harold shrieked with laughter as he finally caught one of the slower chickens, gentle enough not to hurt it but triumphant in his achievement. Ethan got up to rescue the chicken and praise his son, and Amelia watched them together, her heart so full it felt like it might overflow. This was her life now. This ranch, this family, this harsh, beautiful land that had tested her and found her worthy. She had arrived with hope, and in Ethan's eyes, in his love and partnership and unwavering faith in her, she had found prosperity beyond anything money could measure. The years that followed brought their own challenges, as all years do. There were droughts that tested their water systems, winters that pushed cattle and humans to their limits, and the ever-present struggle of making a living from the land. But Amelia and Ethan faced each challenge together, their partnership stronger with each passing season. Harold grew into a bright, energetic boy who loved the ranch and everything about it. By the age of 3, he was following his father around, trying to help with chores, his small hands attempting to mimic Ethan's every movement. He had his mother's determination and his father's quiet strength, and watching him grow was a joy that never diminished. When Harold was 4, Amelia discovered she was pregnant again. This time, the pregnancy was easier, her body knowing what to expect, and she worked almost until the day her daughter was born. They named her Rose, as Amelia had wanted, and she was as different from her brother as night from day. Where Harold was active and outgoing, Rose was quiet and observant, content to sit and watch the world with serious dark eyes that seemed to see everything. With 2 children, the ranch became even more of a family enterprise. Amelia managed the house and garden, raised the children, and kept the books. Ethan handled the cattle and the heavy labor, though Amelia still worked beside him whenever she could. They hired seasonal help during the busiest times, young cowboys looking for work, and they treated them the way Amelia's uncle had treated Ethan, with fairness and respect. The ranch's reputation grew. People knew the Blackwells as honest, hard-working folks who had taken failing land and turned it into something prosperous through sheer determination and innovation. Other ranchers sought Ethan's advice on water management, and Amelia became known for her skill at breeding chickens and growing vegetables in the challenging New Mexico climate. Clayton Reed eventually sold his ranch and moved to California, whether out of disgust at his failed attempts to control the valley or simply because he was getting old and wanted an easier life. No one knew. His departure removed the last shadow hanging over their success, and the valley settled into a period of relative peace and prosperity. Frank Miller became not just a business partner but a true friend, a grandfather figure to Harold and Rose. He and his wife visited often, and the children loved hearing Frank's stories of the old days, when the territory was even wilder and more dangerous than it was now. By the time Harold was 8 and Rose was 4, the Morning Star Ranch was one of the most successful operations in the valley. They had over 100 head of cattle, fields of hay and alfalfa, a large garden that supplied vegetables to several stores in town, and a reputation that brought buyers from as far away as Santa Fe. But more than the material success, what Amelia treasured most were the small moments. Evenings on the porch with Ethan, watching the sunset paint the mountains in shades of gold and purple. Sunday mornings when they would all ride to town for church, the children excited to see their friends. The quiet nights when she and Ethan would lie in bed, talking about their dreams for the future, for their children, for the ranch that had become so much more than just a piece of land. "You ever regret it?" Ethan asked one night, his voice soft in the darkness. "Leaving Philadelphia, coming out here, choosing this life?" "Never," Amelia said without hesitation. "Not for a single moment. This is where I was meant to be. With you, building this life, raising our children on land that belongs to us. How could I regret any of that?" "Even though it has been hard," Ethan pressed. "Even though there were times we did not know if we would make it, especially because of that," Amelia said. "The things worth having are the things worth fighting for. You taught me that. This ranch, our family, it means more because we built it together, because we refused to give up even when it would have been easier to walk away." She felt Ethan's arms tighten around her, pulling her close. "I love you," he said simply. "I loved you from the moment you stood in that dying garden and told me you did not come all this way to turn around at the first sign of difficulty. I loved you when you worked beside me in the heat, digging those trenches. I loved you when you stayed here alone while I went to work the railroad. And I love you more with every passing day." "I love you too," Amelia whispered, "always and forever." The ranch continued to flourish as the children grew. Harold showed an aptitude for working with cattle and horses that made his father proud, while Rose demonstrated a gift for growing things, able to coax life from soil that stubbornly resisted everyone else's efforts. Both children were being raised with an understanding of the value of hard work, the importance of treating others with respect, and the knowledge that their home had been built through determination and love. When Harold turned 10, Ethan gave him his first real responsibilities with the cattle, teaching him to ride fence lines and check on the herd. The boy took to it naturally, and watching father and son ride out together in the early morning light filled Amelia with a contentment she had never imagined possible. Rose, at 6, had taken over a section of the garden that she declared was hers alone. She planted flowers alongside the vegetables, something Amelia had always meant to do but never had time for. The splash of color those flowers brought, roses and sunflowers and morning glories, transformed the utilitarian garden into something beautiful. "Mama," Rose said one day as they worked together in the garden, "tell me again about when you first came here." It was a story Amelia had told many times, but the children never tired of hearing it. She told them about the dusty stagecoach ride, about seeing the failing ranch for the first time, about meeting their father and being struck by his quiet strength and honesty. "Were you scared?" Rose asked. "Terrified," Amelia admitted. "I had never been anywhere like this. Everything was so different from what I knew, but I was also excited." This was mine, this land, this opportunity. No one could take it away from me or tell me what to do with it. That freedom was worth being scared. And then you and Papa fell in love, Rose said, her voice dreamy. At 6, she was already a romantic, always asking about how her parents met and fell in love. Yes, Amelia said softly. We fell in love, but it was not like in stories where everything is easy and perfect. We had to work hard, had to fight for this ranch and our future. Love is not just a feeling, sweetheart. It is a choice you make every day to stand beside someone, to support them, to build something together. I want to find love like that someday, Rose declared. You will, Amelia assured her. When the time is right, you will find someone who sees you for who you really are, who values your strength and your dreams. Never settle for less than that. The conversation reminded Amelia of her own mother, of the dreams her mother had sacrificed, the life she had lived in service to others. Amelia had broken that cycle, had claimed a life of her own choosing, and she was determined that her daughter would have the same opportunity. By the time Harold was 12 and Rose was 8, the ranch was producing enough income that Ethan and Amelia began to plan for the future in new ways. They started a savings account in the bank in Santa Fe, money set aside for the children's education or to help them start their own ranches someday. They expanded the house again, adding a proper dining room and another bedroom. The territorial government was talking about statehood, and with it would come new opportunities and new challenges. But Ethan and Amelia felt ready for whatever came. They had proved they could adapt, could overcome obstacles that would have defeated others. One spring evening, when the world was green from winter rains and the reservoir was full to overflowing, the family sat together on the porch. Harold was practicing rope tricks he had learned from one of the hired hands, while Rose read aloud from a book, her voice clear and confident. Ethan and Amelia sat close together, his arm around her shoulders, watching their children and their land with equal pride. You know what I realized today? Amelia said quietly. What? Ethan asked. I am completely happy, not just content or satisfied, but truly, deeply happy. I did not know if that was possible, if someone like me who had lost so much could ever feel this way, but I do. Here now with you and our children and this life we have built, I am happy. Ethan kissed her forehead gently. So am I. Every single day I wake up grateful. Grateful that your uncle left you this land. Grateful that you were brave enough to come claim it. Grateful that you saw something in me worth building a life with. You saved me, Amelia. Before you came, I was just drifting, going through the motions of living without any real purpose. You gave me everything. We gave each other everything, Amelia corrected, as she always did, because it was true. Their love was not one-sided, not one person saving or completing the other. It was a partnership, a conscious choice they made each day to stand together against whatever challenges the world threw at them. The seasons continued their endless cycle, each bringing its own joys and struggles. The children grew, the ranch prospered, and Amelia and Ethan grew older together, their love deepening with the years. There were losses too, as there always are in life. Frank Miller passed away when Harold was 15, and the entire valley mourned the loss of a good man who had helped so many. But his legacy lived on in the partnerships he had forged, including the one with the Blackwells. Harold left for college in Santa Fe when he was 18, studying agriculture and business, planning to return and help expand the ranch. Rose, at 14, showed no interest in leaving, declaring that everything she needed was right here on the ranch. She had her mother's fierce independence and her father's deep connection to the land. When Harold did return, he brought with him new ideas and techniques learned from the agricultural college. Together, He and Ethan implemented modern ranching practices that increased their productivity while improving conditions for the cattle. The Morning Star Ranch became known throughout the territory as a model operation, proof that innovation and traditional values could work hand in hand. Rose never did leave. She married a young cowboy named Thomas who had come to work at the ranch, and Ethan and Amelia built them a small house on the western edge of the property. Rose and Thomas started their own cattle operation, still part of the family ranch but their own enterprise, and Amelia watched her daughter begin the same journey she had taken decades before. Harold eventually married as well, bringing home a schoolteacher from Santa Fe named Catherine. They built their house on the eastern edge of the ranch, and the Morning Star expanded to encompass 3 families, 3 generations, all working together. Ethan and Amelia grew old on the porch of the house they had built, watching their grandchildren play in the yard where their children had played before them. The ranch that had been failing when Amelia arrived, that everyone had said was worthless and doomed, now stretched across thousands of acres, supporting multiple families, employing dozens of workers during peak seasons. But Amelia knew the ranch's true value had never been in acres or cattle or dollars. Its value was in what it represented, the life it had made possible. She had arrived with nothing but hope and a stubborn refusal to accept defeat. She had found in Ethan a partner who matched her strength with his own, who believed in her even when circumstances seemed hopeless. Together, they had built not just a ranch but a legacy, a family, a future. On her 70th birthday, surrounded by children and grandchildren and friends who had become family, Amelia looked around at the celebration and felt the same surge of gratitude she had felt decades before. This life, this beautiful, hard-won life, was more than she had ever dared to dream. Ethan found her later that evening, standing by the reservoir they had built so long ago, watching the water reflect the stars. He came up behind her, wrapping his arms around her waist as he had done thousands of times before. "What are you thinking about?" he asked. "Everything," Amelia said softly. "That scared girl who stepped off the stagecoach, the dying ranch, the moment I first saw you emerge from the barn. All the struggles and triumphs, the children we raised, the life we built. I am thinking about how one moment, one decision to take a chance can change everything." "You know what I remember most clearly from that first day?" Ethan asked. "What?" "Your eyes," he said. "When you looked at this failing ranch, you did not see what was wrong with it. You saw possibility. You saw hope. And I fell in love with you right then, even though I did not recognize it yet. You taught me how to hope again, Amelia. You taught me that failing does not mean failed, that as long as you are willing to fight, there is always a chance." "We taught each other," Amelia said, turning in his arms to face him. His hair was silver now, his face lined with decades of sun and wind, but his eyes were the same, steady and true. "We saved each other." They stood there together as the stars wheeled overhead. 2 people who had found each other in the vast emptiness of the New Mexico territory, who had taken failing land and turned it into a flourishing ranch, who had built a love that had sustained them through decades of hardship and joy. The ranch was no longer failing. It had not been for a very long time. But the hope Amelia had brought with her that dusty afternoon so many years ago, that had never diminished. It had grown and evolved, spreading to encompass not just the land but the family, the community, the future they were building for generations to come. And in Ethan's eyes, in the love that still shone there after all these years, Amelia continued to find prosperity. Not the prosperity of money or possessions, but something far more valuable. The prosperity of a life lived with purpose, of love freely given and received, of a partnership that had transformed two struggling individuals into something greater than the sum of their parts. This was the true measure of their success, Amelia thought as she and Ethan walked back to the house where their family waited. They had arrived with nothing but hope and determination, and they had built an empire of love that would endure long after they were gone. The ranch would pass to their children and their children's children, but more importantly, so would the lessons they had learned. That failure is not final. That love is a choice and an action, not just a feeling. That with hope and hard work and someone who believes in you, anything is possible. As they reached the porch where lanterns glowed warm and welcoming, Amelia squeezed Ethan's hand. He squeezed back, and no words were needed. After so many years together, they communicated as much through touch and presence as through speech. They stepped into the house together, into the warmth and noise and love of their family, and Amelia knew that whatever challenges tomorrow might bring, they would face them the way they had faced everything else. Together, hand in hand, partners in every sense of the word, their love as enduring as the mountains that watched over their ranch, as constant as the water that flowed through the land they had saved together.